navigating challenges like market volatility, inflation, and retirement income. Pankin Financial Perspective is here to help by addressing common financial concerns, sharing valuable strategies, and exploring ways you can work toward your financial goals. Now let's get started with Pankin Financial Perspective.
Hello and welcome to Pankin Financial Perspective. My name is Ashton Pankin from Pankin Financial Group. If you'd like more information about what you hear during our show today, give us a call at 952-873-2703 or visit us online at pankinandfinancial.com. And while at my website, click on the radio page to check out past shows and to subscribe to our program on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Also on my page, click the link at the top to get the latest retirement guide. Today we're talking about retirement planning, but through a very specific lens. This conversation is really for people who are nearing retirement age, still earning at a high level, and doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is maxing out workplace retirement plans and taking advantage of catch-up contributions. In other words, if you've ever thought, I'm saving, but I want to make sure I'm using every opportunity available to me, this episode is for you. Throughout the first part of today's show, we're going to be referencing a Kiplinger article that's headlined, The 2026 Retirement Catch-Up Curveball, What High Earners 50 and Older Need to Know. And helping me unpack all of this today is my co-host, Tony Shore, who's here to represent the listener and make sure I explain things in plain English instead of industry shorthand.
Yeah, all your fancy financial words that you like to use. I know how it goes. But thanks for having me on the show today, Ashton. I'm excited, and I appreciate that assessment. You know, I'm happy to be here as always, and I like that this episode is really going to speak to people who are already engaged in their planning. I mean, this isn't a start from zero conversation. It's about refining what you're already doing. Most people out there have 401ks or IRAs, and you need to understand how some of these newer rules might come into play. But before we get into that, Ashton, what have you been up to? I know you went to the Children's Museum recently.
Yeah, we had MLK Day. The markets are closed and we didn't have school. And so we brought the kids up to the St. Paul Children's Museum. And actually it was a Christmas present from their aunt, April.
Nice.
And she's been gifting experiences instead of toys, which is great because we all know the kids have plenty of toys.
Yeah.
And so, we had a really nice time up there and spent a few hours up there. And it was good. How have you been, Tony?
I've been good. Spent a little time with my son over the weekend. My wife and I got to see him. He came over, watched some football. Nice. I did go down to see my parents. Went through your hometown of Windham there, over to Fulda, and then down to Worthington and that whole southwestern corner of the state to take care of some things for mom and dad, and got to see them. So I had a nice 3-day weekend as well. Had the Martin Luther King Day off, and that was really fun. So, just a little cold. As of this recording, we're recording this show during the weekend. It's going to be cold. Friday, I heard our high here is supposed to be -9 actual temp for the high. Up to 50 below wind chill, they said, possible for this weekend. That doesn't sound like fun. I don't think. I told my wife, we better get our supplies now. Anything you need, because we're not going out this weekend. I hope there's some good football games on this weekend or something, because we're not doing a lot outside. It's like when I open the door to let the dog outside and he's just like, nope.
No, thank you.
Not doing that. So that's crazy. But let's talk about this. Let's get into what really changes here as far as retirement strategies, because I know there's a big shift coming, right?
Yeah, exactly. Beginning 2026, this year, rules have changed for anyone who earned more than $150,000 in 2025. Every dollar you allocate in catch-up contributions has to go into the Roth side, not the pre-tax side of your 401k. And so for these higher earners, that's kind of a big change there. A lot of high earners get caught off guard because, again, in 2026, this rule changes. And so if you made $150,000 in 2025, every dollar you contribute to the catch-up, not the regular part of the 401k contribution, has to go into the Roth side, not the pre-tax.
And there's the curveball then, right?
Yeah, exactly. For years, those catch-up contributions have been a favorite strategy because they allowed you to save more pre-tax dollars. And for many people, that deduction makes a noticeable difference on their tax return each year.
And now that upfront tax break is gone for those catch-ups. Is that correct?
Yeah, right. So that single change can potentially add a few $1,000s to your 2026 tax bill if you're not prepared for it. And so that's an important clarification here. This rule is based on wages from sponsoring employer plan only. So spousal income doesn't count. Household income isn't a factor there. It's investment income doesn't count. And so any wages outside of that job from a side hustle don't apply either.
Yeah, that's a key distinction. I think a lot of people hear an income threshold and assume it applies to everything coming in.
Yeah, I agree. This is very specific, but it's for those, and it doesn't apply to those that are making less than $150,000. But that impact can feel abrupt. And so, there's some good news here. Your regular contributions up to that $24,500 for 2026 can still be made on a pre-tax basis and get that tax deduction.
Okay. So it's not an all or nothing situation then.
Yeah, correct. You're not losing everything, but you are, if you're counting on those catch-up contributions to help reduce those taxes, this is where that strategy needs to be revisited. The article notes that the IRS finalized this rule in September of 2025. And it's a tough adjustment for a lot of the high earners in their 50s and 60s because, typically those are your highest earning years and you need that tax deduction.
Yeah, especially for people who are used to seeing that deduction year after year, and all of a sudden that opportunity is gone. They have to put it in a Roth where they have to pay taxes on it now and not get the tax break now. But hey, having money in a Roth isn't a bad thing either.
No, it's not. And so, if you built that deduction into your expectations, jump a few $1,000s in your tax bill can come as a real surprise. But that's why you want to understand this change. It's very important to understand how it's going to affect it.
Yeah, and for our listeners out there who may have been making catch-up contributions for years, this is probably the moment they're thinking, hey, wait, why is this changing now? Because this isn't just a technical update. It actually changes how people have been planning, right?
Yeah, and that's a good way to put it, Tony. The Secure 2.0 was broadly designed to encourage more people to save for retirement. But this particular rule has a very different effect on those high earners because it quietly pushes all catch-up contributions into those Roth accounts instead.
And Roth contributions come with a very different trade-off, don't they?
Yeah, they do. With Roth contributions, you're paying taxes now, but qualified withdrawals later are tax-free. So it's not all bad. It's just, it can be unexpected. And so this can be especially appealing if you believe your tax rate will be higher in retirement. And historically, the key word has been choice. You get to choose which one you want to do.
Yeah. And there's another plot twist, right?
Yeah. Under these new rules, higher earners have reduced flexibility. So if you meet that income threshold of $150,000, the IRS is going to require those catch-up contributions to go into the Roth, even if you are currently in a higher tax bracket and would prefer that deduction today. You don't have that choice.
Which makes it feel less like a planning decision and more like a mandate, which it basically is.
Yeah, precisely. And there's another layer that can be easily overlooked as well. If your employer's plan doesn't already offer a Roth option, you could be locked out of making those catch-up contributions altogether until the plan is updated.
Yeah, and that's a big deal, especially for people who are counting on those catch-ups during their peak earning years. And I know that, fortunately, most employers, at least medium to large, now offer the Roth option.
Yeah, it is, Tony. And so, there's some good news here. Employers have been giving a good faith compliance grace period through 2026. So really, you can still do it in 2026, but the full enforcement will be in 2027, according to the article. And that gives plans some time to adopt
so businesses might see, hey, we're going to have to add this. But for the individual saver, the timeline probably still feels much tighter, doesn't it?
Yeah, you got to know from the saver's perspective, the clock is ticking. According to the IRS in this article, 2025 was the last year for unrestricted pre-tax catch-up contributions.
So at this point, it's probably helpful to slow things down and let's clarify what isn't changing, because with rule updates like this one, I think it's easy to assume limits are being reduced or opportunities are going away entirely or across the board.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tony. It's an important clarification. Base contribution limits themselves are actually increasing for 401ks, 403bs, and 457 plans. Last year, it was 23.5 that you were able to do in 2025. And this year, they're increasing that contribution limit up to 24,500.
Yeah, I'm glad they raise the amount you can put in for catch up, and the catch up amounts are still there, right?
Yeah. So again, they're still there. The article highlights that if you're 50 and older, you can make those catch up contributions of $8,000 for 2026.
Wow.
And then if you're between ages 60 and 63, they've got a super catch up amount of $11,250 that still applies.
Wow. From a savings standpoint, the opportunity is still there then.
Yeah, you're still able to contribute the full amount allowed. And again, what's really just changed is the tax treatment of those catch-up dollars for those higher earners. And so again, it's not for everybody. It's just for those higher earners and those catch-up contributions. And so the bottom line is the upfront tax treatment just gets pricier.
And doesn't it also note that simple IRAs see a similar limit increase, but the Roth requirement isn't as broadly applied there with simple IRAs, right?
Yeah, correct. The Roth rule we've been talking about mainly applies to employer-sponsored plans like 401ks. And so that distinction does matter, especially when people have multiple retirement vehicles that they play.
Yeah, they might have personal IRAs, things like that. And I think one of the takeaways here then isn't that saving more is off the table. It's how those contributions are going to be taxed that has shifted, especially for high earners.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, understanding that there is a difference is key to making informed decisions going forward.
Well, before we keep going, though, with today's conversation, Ashton, let our listeners out there know how they can schedule a complimentary consultation to ask questions or get more information.
Yeah, again, this is key tax planning time for, especially when these changes are coming. And so the best way to learn more about it and to ask questions is just to give our office a call, 952-873-2703. Again, that number is 952-873-2703. If it's outside of normal business hours, feel free to give us a call still and leave a voicemail. You can visit us online at pankoninfinancial.com. That's PANKONIN. financial.com. Scheduling a consultation only takes a few minutes, and we're always happy to help and work around your schedule.
All right. Well, this brings us to the trade-off that people are feeling most directly, which is, and this applies to everyone, we need to have this conversation, I think, the difference between getting a tax break now, like those tax deferred plans like 401ks, 403bs, et cetera, versus waiting for benefits later, like the Roth, things like that.
Yeah, nicely put, Tony. Traditionally, catch-up contributions have come with immediate benefit. They're going to reduce that taxable income today in this tax year. So those upfront tax savings have been a big reason why people lean into those catch-ups, especially in their highest earning years.
And again, that's what changes in 2026 for high earners anyway.
Yeah. So again, you're on your A game. Under the new rules, Tony, these individuals will have to pay taxes up front for the full amount of their income. And instead of getting an immediate break on those catch-up contributions, that's the part that tends to hit home when people start running the numbers.
But there is a possible long-term upside here, right?
Yeah. So again, it's not all bad. There is upside here. Roth catch-up contributions can be very effective if you expect your tax rate to be higher in retirement. Or, if you're leaving a tax-free inheritance to your children as a priority, that's a good option with those Roths. And then Roth 401ks don't have to have the required minimum distributions, or RMDs for short. While money remains in the plan, it's up until it's rolled over into a Roth IRA.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about Roth, the benefits of Roths and Roth conversions in the past. It's nice to have money in a tax-free bucket where it's earning all the, that compounding interest, and interest that it's earning is tax-free, and the principals, it all comes out tax-free in a Roth, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And so again, that flexibility can make a big difference. And so I always like to say, it's nice to have a pool of both tax-free and traditional in retirement. It really helps when we're doing our income planning. So there's some practical things to consider here, and that's plan availability. The article highlights a survey from Plan Sponsor Council of America that found that 96% of 401k plans do include that Roth provision now.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that the majority of companies out there are offering a Roth 401k. Of course, there are still advantages to having your own Roth IRA because it allows you more flexibility, more control. Working with a financial advisor can help you look at that. Hey, maybe now's the time to move some money out of your 401k or your Roth 401k into a Roth IRA where you can control it a little more, make sure you're not overpaying in fees and getting the growth you need, right?
Yeah, exactly. And again, there's still about 4% of plans that don't offer that Roth option. And I'm guessing that'll be changing here in 2026 as, we have that year of flexibility to kind of adopt into the new plan here. Otherwise, you could find yourself unable to make those catch-up contributions.
Yeah. So once again, it comes down to knowing how your specific plan is set up. And I think working with a financial services professional like yourself, right?
Yeah. And again, Tony, we talk about this all the time. Everybody's situation is different. It's important to have that customized plan. So that is an essential point that we want to make sure it's set up for your specific plan. These rules don't exist in a vacuum, and how they affect you depends on the details of your employer's plan and then your overall personal situation.
Right. So what's next here?
Yeah, Tony, let's keep our focus on the new year by discussing a second Kiplinger article. This one's called 2026, or is 2026 your year to retire? So after walking through these contribution limit changes, tax treatment, and plan mechanics, it's important to take a step back and ask a bigger question, especially for those who are getting close to pulling the trigger on retirement. Before you join the roughly 4 million Americans expected to retire in the new year, you must be sure. Retirement isn't just something you want to rush into without confidence, because re-entering the workforce later on is often much harder than people expect.
And that's where the idea of a stop or go really comes into play, correct?
Yeah, it's really important, Tony, to pay attention to red flags and green flags, which are those signals that tell you whether you're truly ready to move forward or whether it might make sense to pause and reassess if 2026 is your year.
Yeah, makes me think of back when we were kids. Red light, green light. Do you remember playing that game? Yeah. But you're right. I mean, you got to look for those signals and say, okay, is this a good time for me to maybe do a rollover or pause and reassess? And a big part of that is stress testing your plan, right?
Yeah, very true. It's not enough just to have a strategy that works on paper in a perfect scenario. You want to know whether your plan could hold up during a bad market year. It's easy when we've had such good market years in the last few years to assume it's going to keep going that way. Or if inflation turns out to be higher than in the future than expected.
Yeah. Inflation's a big one. And that's a good reminder that readiness isn't just about hitting a number. You need to factor in all of this. Yeah.
Very important point there, Tony. Here's something that sometimes doesn't get enough attention. Retirement readiness isn't purely financial. There's also an emotional component to that decision as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, you probably see this all the time, Ashton, that transition from working life into retirement, that can be much bigger than people anticipate.
It can be, Tony, and that's why before deciding to retire in 2026, you should see whether you can honestly say yes to a retirement readiness checklist. It's a way to step back and evaluate both the financial side and the non-financial side of the decision, because again, it can be an emotional and personal decision outside of the finances as well.
Well, and one of the first things people tend to focus on when they think about retirement readiness is the number. And that's a dollar amount that they need. They believe they need to live comfortably in retirement. But there's more to it than that. And you want to make sure that you're using the right number and factoring in things like inflation.
Yeah, you do. Almost everyone has a number in mind. The article references that, closely watched a survey from Northwestern Mutual, which puts that so-called magic number if you're shooting for a target at about 1.26 million. So almost 1.25 million, or a little over 1.25 million for 2025 is what most people are shooting for.
Well, yeah, and if you're going to need 1.26 million, I'm going to have to ask you to write me a personal check, Ashton. Going to hit you up for a personal loan.
There we go.
But seriously, that number isn't universal. Everybody's number is going to be different, isn't it?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. For some people that amount may be higher. For others, it could be less. I've got clients that have 500,000 and with Social Security, and the income off the investments are more than happy with their retirement. And so what really matters is whether you've reached your target, which is the number you believe supports that lifestyle you want in retirement. And reaching that target can be a meaningful green flag if we're still looking at those red and green flags.
And if you haven't reached it yet, you don't have to frame it as a failure. You can consider it more like a decision point.
Yeah, I agree with you there. If you're not there yet, there are options like working a little longer, transitioning into a phased retirement by reducing hours or maybe doing some part-time work or consulting work. These approaches can help close that gap without forcing you into that all or nothing decision.
But hitting the number doesn't automatically mean you're in the clear either, does it?
Yeah, correct again, Tony. Reaching your savings target, it is important, but there's a next question. Can your portfolio withstand a market correction?
Yeah, a good question, which is a tough one because no one knows what the markets will do next, right?
Yeah, I wish I did. My job would be a lot easier, but
you don't have a crystal ball?
I don't. Yeah, I do, but it's a little cloudy at times.
Sure.
The article doesn't predict a downturn in 2026, but it does take note that markets have been on a bull run for several years, and historically, periods of growth don't last forever.
And it actually suggests readers run a scenario and work with somebody like yourself to do that, right?
Yeah. Again, you want to pose a simple but powerful question. If your portfolio dropped by 20%, what would that mean for your retirement? Would you still be comfortable? Would your plan still work that you have in place?
Well, and because the consequences can be significant if the answer to that is no.
For sure, they can be. The last thing you want is to retire and not feel confident. And so you want to make sure that if you're feeling confident and then you have a market correction throwing everything off course, at best, that could mean scaling back your retirement lifestyle. At worst, it could mean having to return to work.
And since nobody knows what 2026 will bring, nobody has a crystal ball, preparation does matter.
Yeah, you said it, Tony. If your portfolio can't withstand a hit, it may make sense to keep grinding a little longer, not out of fear, but just to give your plan more resilience.
Right. And make sure you're factoring everything in, too. And again, working with someone like yourself. So once that financial side starts to come into focus, it may be time to shift to a question that's a lot harder to quantify, which is whether you're actually ready to leave your job or not.
Good point, Tony. That's a very important question. Even when the numbers line up, retirement still is a major emotional transition. For a lot of people, work has been where they've invested most of their time, energy, and it's their identity over many years. So letting go of that isn't always easy.
Yeah, and people fall all over the spectrum there, right?
Yeah, they do. For some, their profession is closely tied to their sense of purpose and self-worth. For others, it's more of a see you later. I'm ready for that next chapter. So if you're truly done with a job, it's not done with life. It's just done with this job. It can be a meaningful signal.
It can. That still leaves the question, though, of what comes next.
Yeah. And so here's a simple but critical follow-up. Do you know how you're going to spend your time in retirement? Retiring without a clear plan for your days can lead to boredom and dissatisfaction. So, if you don't have that answer there yet, it may be worth hitting the pause button until you do have an idea of what you want to do after you retire.
I think that's really good advice. And the same idea applies to spending money, not just having it.
Yeah, you nailed it. Knowing that you have enough money is one thing. Knowing how you'll spend it is another. Without real income plan, you're not ready. And that plan can't just be a spreadsheet and fantasy.
Right, especially early on, correct?
Yeah, the first 5 years of retirement are particularly vulnerable. Before you retire, you need clarity around which accounts you'll tap into first and why. You want to plan on when you're going to take Social Security, how withdrawals are handled from a tax perspective, and just how your portfolio is positioned to deal with inflation and market downturns.
That early window can really set the tone, can it?
Yeah, it certainly does. If you have a down couple of years in that early retirement, it can make a big difference versus an up in the market and in your account. So another critical checkpoint is whether your investments are generating more income than you need. If the interest and dividends from your portfolio can cover your expenses, that's a strong sign of readiness.
Because then you won't necessarily be forced to sell in a bad market.
Yeah, correct. Spending principal in a down market can introduce real risk. But if your income needs are met by what your investments generate, that principal can remain intact, fluctuating year to year, but typically rising over the long term.
Yeah, healthcare is another major box people can't ignore.
Yeah, that's for sure. A 65-year-old who plans to retire soon is expected to spend around $172,000 on healthcare costs. Ooh. That includes Medicare, which generally covers about 80%, but it doesn't account for emergencies or long-term care, which can add tens of thousands of dollars more.
That's not just budgeting that's going to fix that. It's scenario testing and working with somebody like yourself to make sure. I think healthcare costs, and especially long-term care costs, that's going to be your biggest expense in retirement, even if you have Medicare, right?
Yeah, you're right. Planning how you're going to cover those out-of-pocket costs and testing different scenarios to understand what you can afford is a critical step before leaving that workforce.
Yeah. So what if somebody is still unsure after all of that?
Talking through your plan with a financial advisor is often helpful. Getting another set of eyes on your strategy can help confirm whether it's designed to last 20 more years and whether it's resilient against inflation, market declines, and unexpected medical expenses. Again, this may be your first retirement, but it's not the first one we've seen.
Right. That's true. And which really brings the whole checklist full circle.
Yeah, it does. Retirement readiness isn't just one decision. It's a series of confirmations that your strategy, your finances, and your expectations are aligned.
Correct. A great point. I think this has been an excellent show, Ashton. Is there anything else you want to add before we go today?
Yeah, again, the biggest thing is this is the time of year for that tax planning, especially with the new rules for catch-up contributions. See how that's going to affect your taxes for 2026. And so, again, if you have questions about your retirement and your financial strategy, visit our website, pankoninfinancial.com. That's PANKONIN financial.com. Give our office a call, 952-873-2703. Again, that number is 952-873-2703. We'd love to help you protect your savings and feel confident about the road ahead.
All right. Well, great show today, Ashton. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. That does it for today's episode of the Pankonin Financial Perspective with our host, Ashton Pankonin.
Thank you for joining us for Pankonin Financial Perspective. Don't head into retirement without a plan for both your finances and your health. For more information, contact Ashton Pankonin at Pankonin Financial Group at 952-873-2703 or visit PankoninFinancialGroup.com. Join us again soon for another episode of Pankonin Financial Perspective. Advisory services are offered by Ashton Pankonin LLC DBA Pankonin Financial Group, an investment advisor in the state of Minnesota.
All matters discussed during the show are for informational purposes only. Each individual situation may vary, and the opinions expressed here may not apply to everyone. Materials presented are believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations can be made as to its accuracy. All ideas and information should be discussed in detail with one of our qualified representatives prior to implementation. We are not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration, the Federal Medicare Program, or any other government agency. Calling this number will direct you to a licensed sales agent.